The Wyoming sun blazed mercilessly over the dusty trail as the wagon train creaked its way across the endless prairie. Mary Sullivan wiped the sweat from her brow with a flour-dusted sleeve, her hands raw from kneading dough since dawn. At 19, she'd already spent 3 years cooking for various wagon trains, earning her keep the only way an orphan girl could in 1882, through honest work and callous hands. "Mary, water's getting low," called out Ben Morrison, the wagon master, a gruff man with a heart softer than his weathered exterior suggested. "I'll fetch some from the river, Mr. Morrison," Mary replied, grabbing 2 buckets. She'd spotted the Snake River glinting like a silver ribbon through the cottonwoods ahead. The other families in the caravan barely noticed her departure. She was just a hired help, invisible unless their stomachs growled or their coffee ran cold. Mary didn't mind the anonymity. It was safer than attracting the wrong kind of attention. The riverbank provided blessed shade under the sprawling willows. Mary knelt at the water's edge, filling her first bucket when she heard it, a splash too large for any fish, followed by the desperate thrashing of someone fighting the current. Without thinking, she plunged into the cold water, her heavy skirts immediately weighing her down. A man's had bobbed in the rapids, his body limp against the rocks. Mary fought against the current, her swimming skills learned from childhood summers in Ohio serving her well now. She grabbed his collar, using every ounce of strength to drag him toward the shallows. His fine clothes, a silk vest and tailored pants, marked him as no ordinary traveler. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, staining the water pink. "Please, don't be dead," she whispered, hauling him onto the muddy bank. His chest rose and fell weakly. Relief flooded through her as she pressed her ear to his chest, hearing the steady thump of his heart. The man was handsome in a way that belonged in Eastern drawing rooms, not the brutal wilderness. Dark hair, now plastered to his head, framed angular features softened by unconsciousness. His hands, though scratched, lacked the calluses of hard labor. "Sir, can you hear me?" Mary gently slapped his cheeks, water dripping from her soaked dress onto his face. His eyes fluttered open, the deepest brown she'd ever seen, like expensive coffee she'd only smelled but never tasted. Confusion clouded his gaze before focusing on her face. "Am I dead?" His voice was cultured, refined. "Not if I have anything to say about it," Mary replied, tearing a strip from her petticoat to bandage his head. "What happened? How did you end up in the river?" He struggled to sit up, wincing. "My horse, spooked by a rattler. Threw me." He touched the makeshift bandage gingerly. "Thank you, miss." "Mary Sullivan. And you shouldn't move yet. That's quite a knock you took." "Thomas Hartley." He extended his hand formally, even in his disheveled state. Mary shook it, noting how her work-roughened palm contrasted with his smooth skin. The name tickled something in her memory. Where had she heard it before? "We need to get you back to my wagon train. Our guide might have some medical supplies." Wagon train. Thomas's expression sharpened despite his injury. On this land, a chill ran down Mary's spine that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. "Yes, sir. The Morrison party, heading to Oregon Territory." Thomas's jaw tightened. "This is private property. My property. Your wagon master knows the Hartley Ranch stretches for 50 miles in every direction." The memory clicked into place. Thomas Hartley, the cattle baron who owned more land than some eastern states. The man whose no trespassing signs they deliberately ignored because the alternate route added 2 weeks to their journey. I'm sure Mr. Morrison has an agreement." Mary lied poorly, her cheeks flushing. "No, he doesn't." Thomas tried to stand but swayed dangerously. Mary caught him, his weight pressing against her. "Because I don't make agreements with trespassers." "Then I suppose I should let you drown," Mary snapped, immediately regretting her sharp tongue. But instead of anger, she caught a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "That would have been inconvenient for both of us," he conceded, "though it seems I'm in no position to evict anyone at the moment." Mary supported him as they began the slow walk back to the wagons. His body heat seeped through her wet clothes, and she became acutely aware of the impropriety of their closeness. But propriety seemed foolish when a man's life hung in the balance. Why risk yourself for a stranger? Thomas asked, his breath warm against her ear as he leaned heavily on her shoulder. "Because it was the right thing to do," Mary answered simply. "Even knowing I could have your entire party arrested? Especially then. Maybe saving your life will buy us safe passage." Thomas chuckled, then groaned as the movement jarred his injury. "You're either very brave or very foolish, Miss Sullivan." "Probably both," she admitted. As the wagon train came into view, Mary saw the commotion her absence had caused. Ben Morrison stood with his rifle, scanning the horizon. His face went through several expressions upon seeing her: relief, confusion, then alarm as he recognized the quality of Thomas's clothing. "Mary, what in blazes?" "This is Mr. Thomas Hartley," Mary announced, feeling Thomas straighten beside her despite his injury. "He's hurt and needs medical attention." The color drained from Ben's face. Other members of the wagon train gathered, whispering among themselves. They all knew whose land they crossed. "Mr. Hartley," Ben stammered. "I can explain." Later, Thomas cut him off, though not unkindly. "Right now, I need a place to rest. Miss Sullivan saved my life, and I'm not ungrateful. We'll discuss your situation when my head stops spinning." Mary helped Thomas to her small wagon, ignoring the stares and whispers. She'd just saved the one man who could destroy them all. As she settled him onto her thin mattress, their eyes met again. "This changes nothing," he said quietly. "You're still trespassing." "I know," Mary replied, wringing out her skirts. "But you're still alive to do something about it." A ghost of a smile touched his lips before exhaustion claimed him. Mary sat beside him, watching his chest rise and fall, wondering what morning would bring. She'd saved a rich man's life, but at what cost to her poor companions? Outside, she heard Ben Morrison's worried voice organizing guards. They all knew Thomas Hartley's reputation: fair but unforgiving when it came to his land. Mary had pulled him from the river, but she might have doomed them all in the process. As sunset painted the sky crimson, Mary allowed herself one moment of foolishness. She brushed a damp lock of hair from Thomas's forehead, feeling something stir in her chest she couldn't name. He was everything she could never have: wealthy, powerful, from a world that would never accept a penniless orphan. But for now, in her humble wagon with the prairie wind whistling to the canvas, they were just two people brought together by the river's whim. Tomorrow would bring its own troubles. Tonight, she'd watch over him and pretend the divide between their worlds wasn't as vast as the land he owned. Dawn crept across the prairie like spilled honey, painting the grasslands gold. Mary had barely slept, checking on Thomas throughout the night, replacing the cool cloth on his forehead whenever fever threatened. Now, as morning sounds filled the camp, children crying, pots clanging, horses nickering, she watched him stir. "Water," he croaked, and Mary quickly helped him drink from her canteen. "How do you feel?" she asked, noting with relief that his color had improved. "Like my horse danced on my skull." He struggled to sit up, taking in the cramped confines of her wagon. His gaze lingered on her meager possessions: a worn Bible, a chipped mirror, 2 patched dresses hanging from a nail. "These are your quarters?" "It's enough," Mary said defensively, catching his pitying look. "Not everyone needs a mansion to be content." "I didn't mean—" He stopped, seeming to realize how his words sounded. "Forgive me. I'm not accustomed to this." A knock on the wagon board interrupted them. "Mary, is Mr. Hartley awake?" Ben Morrison's anxious voice carried clearly. "Come in, Mr. Morrison," Thomas called out, his tone shifting to one of authority despite his weakened state. Ben climbed in, hat in hand, followed by Jacob Turner, the train's unofficial lawyer, though his credentials were as questionable as their right to be on this land. "Mr. Hartley, sir," Ben began, "about yesterday—" "You're trespassing," Thomas stated flatly. "The signs are posted every mile. The deed to this land is registered in Cheyenne. You have no legal right to be here. The regular trails washed out from spring floods." Jacob interjected. "We had no choice." "There's always a choice," Thomas cut him off. "You chose convenience over law." Mary watched the exchange, noting how Thomas commanded respect even from her bedroll. But she also saw the fear in Ben's eyes. He had 40 families depending on him, including widows and children. What would you have us do? Ben asked quietly. Turn back? We've come too far. Go around? That adds 3 weeks, and we don't have supplies for that. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Mary found herself holding her breath. How many wagons? He finally asked. 15 families. 43 souls total, including children. Cattle? Maybe 30 head, mostly milk cows. Few dozen chickens. Nothing that would damage your range. Thomas turned to Mary. And you? Are you traveling with family? I'm employed by the train, she said, lifting her chin. I cook and help with laundering. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise? Respect? You risk your life for strangers who employ you? They're good people, Mary said firmly. Just try and find better lives. Thomas studied her for a moment longer, then addressed Ben. I'll make you a deal, Morrison. My foreman and some of my hands are driving cattle to the railroad at Rock Springs. I was riding ahead to arrange the sale when my accident occurred. Without me there, they'll get cheated by the buyers. Cowboys aren't known for their negotiation skills. What are you proposing? Ben asked warily. Take me with you. Your train moves slower than I could ride, but it's heading in the right direction. I need time to recover anyway. In exchange, I'll grant you passage across my land, this time only. You'll stick to the trail I designate, take only what water you need, and cause no damage. That's generous of you, sir, Jacob said quickly, before Ben could object. It's practical, Thomas corrected. I need transportation. You need passage. And Miss Sullivan saved my life. That's worth something. Mary felt heat rise to her cheeks as his gaze found hers again. There are conditions, Thomas continued. Any of your people caught stealing, even a single chicken, and the deal's off. I'll have the sheriff waiting for you at the county line. Understood. Understood, Ben agreed hastily. You have my word. After the men left, Mary busied herself checking Thomas's bandage. That was kind of you, she said softly. It was business, he replied, but she caught him watching her. Though I admit, I'm curious about you, Miss Sullivan. How does an educated woman end up cooking for wagon trains? What makes you think I'm educated? Your speech, your bearing. You've had schooling. Mary's hand stilled. The orphanage in Cincinnati believed in educating their charges. Fat lot of good it did me. Knowing Shakespeare doesn't fill empty stomachs. Is that bitterness I hear? Reality, she corrected, rewrapping his bandage with perhaps more force than necessary. Education is a luxury for women like me. It just makes us aware of everything we can't have. Thomas caught her wrist gently. What can't you have? The touch of his skin on hers sent an unexpected jolt through her. Mary pulled away, busying herself with packing supplies. Respect. Security. Choice in my own future. Shall I go on? I've offended you. No, Mary sighed, turning back to him. You reminded me. There's a difference. A commotion outside interrupted them. Excited voices. Children shouting. Mary peered out to see riders approaching. Hard-faced men wearing gun belts and bearing the distinctive H brand of the Hartley Ranch on their horses. Your men, she guessed. Thomas nodded, his expression growing serious. My foreman, Bill Crenshaw. This should be interesting. Indeed, Crenshaw's face when he saw his employer emerging from a servant girl's wagon was something to behold. The grizzled foreman's hand actually moved toward his gun before recognizing Thomas. Boss? What in the hell? Language, Bill. There are ladies present. Thomas gestured to Mary. Miss Sullivan saved my life yesterday. The wagon train has agreed to transport me to Rock Springs. Crenshaw's eyes narrowed as he took in Mary's simple dress and work-worn hands. His dismissal was obvious and insulting. You sure that's wise, boss? Traveling with these folks. Are you questioning my judgment, Bill? The foreman backed down but shot Mary a look that made his opinion clear. She'd seen that look before. She was beneath notice, beneath consideration, just hired help. We'll ride alongside, Crenshaw said. Make sure there's no trouble. You'll do no such thing, Thomas said evenly. You'll ride ahead to Rock Springs as planned. I need you to keep those buyers honest until I arrive. But, boss, that's an order, Bill. After his men reluctantly departed, Thomas turned to Mary. I apologize for Bill. He's protective. He's honest, Mary replied. At least he shows his disdain openly. It's the ones who hide it behind false smiles I worry about. You've encountered many of those? Mr. Hartley, I'm a woman with no family, no money, and no prospects, making my way alone in the world. What do you think? He studied her with those intense brown eyes. I think you're stronger than you know, Mary Sullivan. The use of her first name was improper, too familiar, but something about the way he said it made her heart skip. This was dangerous territory, more dangerous than the river that had brought them together. I should check on breakfast, she said quickly. The families will be hungry. Of course. But Mary, he called as she climbed down from the wagon. Thank you, not just for saving me, but for the conversation. It's been enlightening. She paused, looking back at him. In the morning light, with his fine clothes rumpled and his perfect hair mussed, he looked almost human, almost accessible, almost. Rest, Mr. Hartley. We have a long journey ahead. As she walked toward the cook wagon, Mary felt his eyes following her. She also felt the stares of the other travelers. Curious, speculative, some jealous. They all wondered what had transpired in her wagon overnight. Let them wonder, she thought, tying on her apron. They'd never understand the strange connection she felt with a man who could destroy them all with a word. A connection that transcended class and circumstance, born from a moment of desperate courage in a rushing river. But connections weren't enough to bridge the gap between their worlds. Mary had learned long ago that fairy tales were for rich girls with dowries and family names. Girls like her got reality, and reality meant knowing your place. Still, as she stirred the pot of porridge, she couldn't help glancing back at her wagon where Thomas Hartley rested. For just a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like if the world were different, if she were different. If a cattle baron could look at a servant girl and see more than just a help. Then baby Sarah Carter started crying, and old Mr. Jameson complained about his rheumatics, and the dream dissolved like morning mist. Mary ladled out breakfast with practiced efficiency, burying foolish thoughts beneath the familiar rhythm of work. But throughout the morning, she felt his presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. And despite her best efforts, hope, that most dangerous of emotions, began to bloom in her chest like a prairie flower after rain. 3 days into their unlikely arrangement, the wagon train had settled into an uneasy rhythm. Thomas Hartley, despite his injury, had proven to be less of a burden than expected. He'd even helped repair the Widow Patterson's broken axle, surprising everyone with his practical knowledge. But it was his growing attention to Mary that set tongues wagging around the evening campfires. Ain't proper, Mrs. Turner muttered, loud enough for Mary to hear as she served the evening meal. A rich man spending so much time with the help. Mark my words, no good will come of it. Mary kept her eyes down, ladling stew with practiced movements. She'd learned to armor herself against such comments, but they stung more now, perhaps because part of her feared Mrs. Turner was right. Mary, a familiar voice called, and she turned to find Thomas approaching, still favoring his left side but moving with increasing confidence. Might I have a word? The conversations around the campfire quieted, all eyes following their interaction. Of course, Mr. Hartley, Mary replied formally, aware of their audience. He guided her away from the others, toward where the horses were picketed for the night. The prairie stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars, and for a moment they stood in comfortable silence. You've been avoiding me, he said finally. I've been working, Mary corrected. Unlike some, I can't afford leisure time. That's unfair. Is it? She turned to face him. Do you know what they're saying? About you? About me? About what you must want from the orphan girl who pulled you from a river? His jaw tightened. I don't care what they say. Because you don't have to. The words burst out before she could stop them. Tomorrow, next week, you'll go back to your ranch, your life. But I'll still be here with these people, and my reputation is all I have. If they think I'm... She couldn't finish the sentence. That you're what? Mine. His voice dropped, and something in it made her shiver. Would that be so terrible? Don't. Mary stepped back. Please don't. Not when we both know how this ends. How does it end, Mary? With you in your big house and me in someone else's kitchen. With you married to some banker's daughter who brings land and money and the right bloodline. With me forgotten, except maybe as an amusing story about that time you traveled with common folk. Thomas caught her arm as she turned to leave. You don't know me as well as you think. Then tell me I'm wrong, Mary challenged. Tell me you'd introduce me to your friends. Tell me you'd seat me at your table when the governor comes to dinner. Tell me you'd walk with me down the main street of Cheyenne without shame. His silence was answer enough. Mary pulled free, blinking back tears she refused to shed. That's what I thought. She'd made it 3 steps when his voice stopped her. My mother was a schoolteacher. Mary paused but didn't turn. From Boston, educated, refined, but poor as a church mouse. My father met her when he was building his empire, just a man with dreams and dirty hands. Everyone told him he was a fool. Her family disowned her for marrying beneath her station. His friends said she'd never survive the frontier. Now Mary did turn, seeing him silhouetted against the stars. They were wrong, Thomas continued. She was the strongest woman I ever knew. Taught school to ranch children. Started the first library in 3 counties. Never once complained about what she'd given up. When she died of fever 5 years ago, half the territory came to her funeral. Not because she was Mrs. Hartley, but because she was herself. Why are you telling me this? Because you remind me of her. That same steel beneath the softness. That same refusal to be less than you are, even when the world tries to make you small. He stepped closer. And because I want you to know that I understand the divide between us better than you think. I've seen it bridged before. Your parents' situation was different. Was it? A poor woman and a rich man. Society against them, everything saying it couldn't work. His hand found her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Tell me how that's different. Because you're not your father, Mary whispered. You're established, respected. You have too much to lose. And what if I think you're worth losing it for? The words hung between them like a challenge. Mary's heart hammered against her ribs as Thomas leaned closer, his intention clear. For a moment, she let herself imagine it, his lips on hers, the taste of possibility, the warmth of being wanted. Then a child's laughter from the camp broke the spell. Mary stepped back, the space between them suddenly vast. 3 more days to Rock Springs, she said quietly. Then you go your way and I go mine. It's better if we remember that. She fled before he could respond, before her resolve could crumble. Behind her, she heard him call her name, but she didn't stop, couldn't stop, because if she turned back, if she let him kiss her under those infinite stars, she'd be lost. The next morning brought trouble in the form of a broken wheel on the lead wagon. As the men worked to repair it, Thomas surprised everyone by rolling up his sleeves to help. Mary watched from her cook station as he worked alongside Ben Morrison and the others, his fine hands now dirty, sweat soaking through his shirt. Never thought I'd see the day, Widow Patterson commented, joining Mary. A Hartley doing common labor. He's not what I expected, Mary admitted. Men rarely are, child. The question is whether he's different enough. The older woman's knowing look made Mary blush. Oh, don't look so shocked. Everyone can see how he watches you, like a man dying of thirst looking at water. It doesn't matter how he looks at me, doesn't it? Widow Patterson lowered her voice. My herald was a banker's son. I was a seamstress. Everyone said it wouldn't work. 30 years and 6 children later, I can say they were wrong. But it wasn't easy. Love never is when you're crossing lines others have drawn. Who said anything about love? The widow's laugh was dry as dust. Child, I've lived too long to mistake that look in both your eyes. But you're right to be cautious. The world's cruel to women who reach above their station. Just don't let fear make your choices for you. Regret's a bitter companion in old age. As the wheel was finally repaired and the train resumed its slow progress, Mary found herself watching Thomas. He stayed to eat with the men who'd worked on the wagon, sharing their simple food without complaint, listening to their stories with what seemed like genuine interest. Maybe he was different. Maybe his mother's influence had shaped him in ways that defied his class. Maybe Miss Mary. Young Timothy Carson came running. Mr. Hartley asks if you could bring medical supplies. Mr. Jameson's cut his hand real bad. Mary grabbed her kit and rushed to where a crowd had gathered. Joseph Jameson sat pale-faced, his left hand wrapped in a bloody cloth. Thomas knelt beside him, keeping pressure on the wound. "It's deep," Thomas told her quietly. "Needs stitching." Mary had sewn up plenty of wounds on the trail, but usually with the patient drunk on whiskey to dull the pain. Jameson was a teetotaler, proud of his temperance. "I can do it," she said, threading her needle with steady hands. "But it'll hurt something fierce." "I've endured worse," Jameson said through gritted teeth, though his face suggested otherwise. As Mary worked, Thomas held the man steady, talking quietly about his ranch, about cattle prices, about anything to distract from the pain. His voice was soothing, cultured but warm, and Mary found herself listening too, letting it calm her own nerves as she made each careful stitch. "There," she said finally, tying off the thread. "Keep it clean and dry. I'll check it again tomorrow." Jameson managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Miss Mary." Mr. Hartley. He looked between them with something like approval. "Make a good team, you two." Later, as Mary cleaned her supplies, Thomas approached. "You have skilled hands." Another gift from the orphanage. They believed in practical education. "I'm starting to think that orphanage produced remarkable women." Mary looked up to find him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Thomas." "I know," he said softly. 3 more days. "But Mary, what if—" "Boss!" The shout came from the outriders. Riders coming hard from the east. Thomas was on his feet instantly, his hand going to the gun he'd started wearing. Mary followed his gaze to see a dust cloud approaching fast. Too fast for friendly visitors. "Get everyone to the wagons," Thomas ordered Ben, his entire demeanor changing. "Women and children in the center. Men, get your rifles." "Who are they?" Mary asked, though she feared she knew. Probably rustlers. They hit the herds heading to Rock Springs, looking for easy targets. His face was grim. They must have heard the famous Thomas Hartley was traveling with a vulnerable wagon train. The riders came into view, 6 men, hard-faced and well-armed. They pulled up just outside rifle range, their leader, a scarred man with cold eyes, riding forward. "Well, well," the man called out, Tom Hartley himself, playing nursemaid to a bunch of sodbusters. "How the mighty have fallen." Jake Coulter, Thomas said quietly to Ben, "wanted in 3 territories. Keep your people calm. Let me handle this." He walked forward, Mary's heart in her throat as she watched. The 2 men faced each other like gunfighters in a dime novel, except this was real, and Thomas was still injured. "Coulter," Thomas called out, "you're on my land." "Just passing through," Coulter replied with a mock tip of his hat. "Heard you were laid up. Thought we'd check on your health. As you can see, I'm fine. Now move along." "Now!" That's not very neighborly, especially when these folks are trespassing on your property. Seems to me they should pay a toll. "Say, those cattle are driving? Maybe that pretty little thing who's been nursing you." Mary saw Thomas's hand move slightly toward his gun. "These people are under my protection. You'll get nothing from them." "Protection?" Coulter laughed. "You can barely stand straight. What are you going to do, bleed on us?" "Try me." The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Mary found herself moving before she realized it, walking toward the confrontation. She heard Ben hiss her name, but she didn't stop. "Mr. Hartley," she called out, her voice carrying clearly. "Your bandage needs changing. The doctor in Rock Springs will be upset if you tear those stitches." Thomas didn't take his eyes off Coulter. "Not now, Mary." But she kept coming, moving to stand beside him. "I'm afraid I must insist. You're still my patient, after all." Coulter's eyes fixed on her, and she fought not to shrink from his gaze. "So you're the angel of mercy." Pretty thing like you wasted on these dirt farmers. I go where I'm needed, Mary said evenly. Right now, Mr. Hartley needs medical attention. So unless you gentlemen are injured as well, I'll ask you to excuse us. It was absurd, acting like this was a social call, like armed outlaws weren't threatening them all. But sometimes absurdity could defuse tension. Coulter stared at her for a long moment, then burst out laughing. "You've got sand, girl. I'll give you that." He looked back at Thomas. "Seems you found herself a wildcat. Hartley. Best keep her close. Be a shame if something happened to her on these dangerous roads." The threat was clear. Thomas stepped slightly in front of Mary. "You've had your fun, Coulter. Now get off my land before I forget I'm a civilized man." "Civilized?" Coulter repeated mockingly. "That's your problem. Hartley, too civilized for your own good." He wheeled his horse around. "Be seeing you, folks. Real soon." The outlaws rode off in a cloud of dust and threat. Only when they were specks on the horizon did Thomas allow his shoulders to sag. "That was foolish," he told Mary, though his tone held more worry than anger. "So was facing them injured and outnumbered," she countered. "Besides, someone had to give you an excuse to back down without losing face." He looked at her with something like wonder. "You understand the game." "I understand, man. Their pride will kill them if you let it." She touched his arm gently. "Come, that bandage really does need changing." As they walked back to the wagons, the other travelers looked at them with new respect. Mary had stood with him against armed men. Thomas had risked his life for people who were nothing to him. In that moment, the divide between their worlds seemed less important than the bridge they were building, one dangerous moment at a time. But Jake Coulter's words echoed in Mary's mind. Real soon. The threat wasn't over. And suddenly, 3 more days to Rock Springs seemed like a lifetime. The attack came at dawn on their second-to-last day, swift and brutal as a prairie storm. Mary woke to gunfire and screaming, her wagon rocking as horses thundered past. She grabbed a rifle Thomas had insisted she keep close, her hand steady despite the chaos erupting outside. "Stay down." Thomas burst through her wagon flap, blood on his shirt. Not his own, she realized with relief. Coulter's men hit the night guards. They're after the cattle and supplies. Through the canvas, Mary could see riders circling the wagons, firing into the air, trying to scatter the families. Children wailed as mothers pulled them under cover. The men were returning fire, but they were farmers and shopkeepers, not fighters. "Where's Ben?" Mary asked, checking her rifle was loaded, organizing the defense. But Mary, Coulter's not with them. This is a diversion. Thomas's face was grim. He's after something else. A scream pierced the morning air. Young Sarah Patterson, the widow's daughter. Mary's blood ran cold as she saw the girl being dragged toward a rider's horse. "Sarah." Mary was moving before Thomas could stop her, bursting from the wagon with her rifle raised. The outlaw holding Sarah turned, surprised to see a woman coming at him armed and furious. His hesitation cost him. Mary's shot took his shoulder, spinning him away from the girl. "Run, Sarah." Mary shouted, chambering another round. But now she was exposed, and Coulter's men had noticed. Bullets whined past her as she dove behind a water barrel. Thomas was beside her in an instant, his pistol barking as he provided cover. "I told you to stay down," he shouted over the gunfire. "And let them take a child?" Mary snapped back, squeezing off another shot. "I think not." Despite everything, she caught him grinning. "Remind me never to argue with you when you're armed." The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes. The wagon train's men, inspired by Mary's courage, fought with renewed vigor. Even some of the women emerged with whatever weapons they could find, rolling pins, kitchen knives, anything to fend their families. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. Coulter's men retreated, leaving 2 of their own dead and carrying their wounded. The wagon train had held, but at a cost. 3 men injured, supplies scattered, and everyone shaken. "They'll be back," Thomas said grimly as he helped bandage the wounded. "This was just testing our defenses." Mary worked alongside him, her hands steady as she cleaned and stitched wounds. The other women watched her with something approaching awe. She'd stood and fought like a man, then returned to healing work without missing a beat. Miss Mary, Widow Patterson said quietly, "That was the bravest thing I ever saw. You saved my Sarah." Anyone would have done the same, Mary deflected, but she caught Thomas watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. As the sun climbed higher, Ben Morrison called a meeting. The families gathered, fear and determination warring on their faces. "We can't stay here," Ben said, "but if we move, we're vulnerable on the open trail. Rock Springs is still a day and a half away," Jacob Turner added. "Coulter will hit us again before we reach it. Then we make our stand here," Thomas said, surprising everyone. "Send riders to Rock Springs. My men should be there by now. Tell Bill Crenshaw to come with everyone he can gather. We ford up until help arrives." "That could take 2 days," someone protested. "We don't have the ammunition for a siege." "Then we'll have to be clever about it." Thomas looked around the circle. "Who here has blasting powder?" Old Pete Williams raised his hand. "Got some for clearing rocks on my claim. Not much, though." "It'll do. Here's what we're going to do." The rest of the day was spent in preparation. Under Thomas's direction, they circled the wagons tighter, dug rifle pits, and set traps using the blasting powder. Mary found herself appointed as assistant strategist, her quick mind grasping Thomas's plans and improving on them. "You'd have made a fine general," Thomas told her as they worked side by side, filling bags with sand for barriers. "I'd rather make peace than war," Mary replied, wiping sweat from her brow. "But I'll fight for what matters." "And what matters to you, Mary Sullivan?" She paused, looking around at the families preparing to defend their dreams. These people, their chance at something better, the right to hope for more than what the world says they deserve. "And yourself? What do you hope for?" The question hung between them, loaded with meaning. Mary met his eyes, seeing him a future she'd never dared imagine. "I used to hope for security," she said softly. "A position in a good household. Maybe enough saved to not die in poverty." She took a breath. "But lately, I've been hoping for more. Foolishly, perhaps." Thomas stepped closer, mindless of the others watching. "Not foolish. Never foolish." His hand found hers, rough with work, but gentle. "Mary, when this is over." "Thomas, riders coming." The shout shattered the moment, but this time it wasn't Coulter's men. A lone rider approached under a white flag. Coulter himself, bold as brass. "Hartley," he called out. "Let's talk like civilized men." Thomas's jaw tightened, but he holstered his gun. "Stay here," he told Mary. "Like hell," she muttered, following him to the barricade. Coulter sat his horse easily, that same mocking smile playing on his scarred face. "Quite the little fort you've built, but you know it won't hold. Not against what I'm bringing." "State your terms," Thomas said coldly. "Simple. You come with me. The famous Thomas Hartley will fetch a pretty ransom from your wealthy friends. These folks go free, keep their wagons and their dreams." Coulter's eyes found Mary. "I'll even let you say goodbye to your nurse." "No," Mary said before Thomas could speak. "Absolutely not." Coulter laughed. "Fierce little thing, aren't you? But this isn't your decision, girl, isn't it?" Mary stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly. "You think we'll trade one life for our safety? You think that's the kind of people we are?" "I think you're the kind of people who want to live," Coulter replied. "Your man there understands. Don't you, Hartley? You know what I'll do if you refuse. These farmers can't stop me. Their blood will be on your hands." Mary saw Thomas wavering, saw the noble fool actually considering it. Without thinking, she raised her rifle, pointing it directly at Coulter. "Here's my counteroffer," she said, her voice steady as her aim. "You leave now while you still can. Because if you come back, if you threaten these people again, I'll put a bullet between your eyes. And unlike you, Mr. Coulter, I don't miss." The outlaw's eyes widened slightly. He believed her. "You'd murder a man in cold blood? To protect innocent families?" Without hesitation. She cocked the rifle for emphasis. "Your move." For a long moment, Violence trembled in the air. Then Coulter laughed, genuine this time. "Hartley, you lucky bastard. Finding a woman with more balls than half the men I know." He tipped his hat to Mary. "Until tonight, then. We'll see if your aim's as good in the dark." He rode away, leaving silence in his wake. Mary lowered her rifle, her hands finally beginning to shake. Thomas caught her as her knees buckled. "That was insane," he breathed into her hair. "Magnificent, but insane." "He was going to take you," she said against his chest. "I couldn't. I won't let that happen." "Mary." He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "My brave, impossible girl. What am I going to do with you?" "Keep me," she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. His answer was in his kiss. Fierce and tender, claiming and surrendering all at once. Around them, she heard gasps and murmurs, but she didn't care. Let them talk. Let the whole world know that Thomas Hartley was kissing the hired help, that Mary Sullivan was reaching above her station. Because in that moment, with his lips on hers and danger closing in, none of it mattered. Not class, not money, not the impossible divide between their worlds. Only this, two hearts finding each other against all odds. When they finally broke apart, the entire wagon train was staring, some shocked, some approving, all understanding that something fundamental had shifted. "Well," Ben Morrison said dryly, "I guess that settles that question." As sunset approached, they made final preparations. The women and children were moved to the center wagons. Ammunition was distributed, and everyone took their positions. Mary stood with Thomas at the main barricade, rifle ready. "Whatever happens," Thomas said quietly, "I want you to know." "Tell me after," Mary interrupted. "When we've won, when we're safe. Tell me then." He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face. "After, then, I'll hold you to that, Mary Sullivan." The first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Coulter and his men were preparing their assault. But here, behind makeshift walls with impossible odds, Mary felt oddly at peace. She'd found something worth fighting for. These people, this man, this chance at a different life. "Here they come," someone whispered, and shadows began moving on the prairie. Mary chambered around, steady as stone. Beside her, Thomas did the same. Behind them, 43 souls held their breath and prepared to fight for their dreams. The battle for their future was about to begin. The night erupted in flames and gunfire. Coulter's men came from 3 sides, using the darkness as cover, but Thomas had anticipated this. The first wave hit the tripwires, setting off small charges of blasting powder that lit up the prairie and revealed their positions. "Fire," Thomas commanded, and the defenders opened up with everything they had. Mary's world narrowed to the rhythm of combat. Aim, fire, reload. Beside her, Thomas was a steady presence, calling out positions, coordinating the defense. When outlaws tried to rush their section, they fought as one, covering each other's reloading, moving in sync as if they'd done this for years. "Left side," Mary shouted, swinging her rifle to pick off a man trying to climb into the Wagner wagon. The battle raged for hours, attacks coming in waves. Between assaults, Mary tended the wounded, her dress now torn and blood-stained. Young Timothy Carson had taken a bullet in the arm, and she worked to stop the bleeding while his mother sobbed. "You're being so brave," Mary told the boy, who was trying not to cry. "Braver than those outlaws out there." "Really?" Timothy managed through gritted teeth. "Really, they hide in the dark. You're facing your pain in the light." A fresh volley of gunfire cut off any response. Mary grabbed her rifle and returned to the barricade, where Thomas was organizing a counterattack. "They're massing for a final push," he told Ben Morrison grimly. "Everything they've got." Mary could see them out there. Too many shadows moving in the dying light of the powder charges. Their ammunition was running low. Several defenders were wounded, and Coulter's men smelled blood. "Thomas," she said quietly, "if they break through, they won't." His voice was steel, but she saw fear in his eyes. Not for himself, but for her, for all of them. That's when they heard it. Hoofbeats like thunder and a war cry that chilled the blood. But it wasn't coming from Coulter's position. "That's Bill," Thomas shouted, relief flooding his face. "That's my men." The Hartley Ranch hands hit Coulter's forces from behind like an avenging army, led by the formidable Bill Crenshaw. Dozens of cowboys who'd ridden through the night fell upon the outlaws with savage efficiency. Caught between the wagon train's desperate defense and fresh attackers, Coulter's men broke. Some fled into the darkness. Others threw down their weapons. In minutes, the tide had turned completely. Mary saw Coulter himself trying to escape, spurring his horse toward the open prairie. Without thinking, she raised her rifle, sighting carefully in the dim light. The shot was impossible. Too far, too dark, a moving target. She fired. Coulter jerked in his saddle, but kept riding. For a moment, Mary thought she'd missed. Then the outlaw slowly toppled from his horse, landing in a heap on the prairie grass. "Good God!" Thomas breathed beside her. That was 300 yards in the dark. "I told him I don't miss," Mary said simply, though her hands were shaking now. As dawn broke over the prairie, the full scope of their victory became clear. Coulter was dead, his gang scattered or captured. The wagon train had lost 2 men, brave souls who died defending their families. But it could have been so much worse. Bill Crenshaw approached, his weathered face showing grudging respect as he looked at Mary. "Ma'am," he touched his hat, "Boss says you're the reason these folks are alive. That shot, I've never seen anything like it." "Mr. Crenshaw," Mary nodded, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. "Bill," he corrected. "And if you don't mind my saying, any woman who can shoot like that and patch men up after is welcome at the Hartley Ranch any time." Thomas stepped forward, his hand finding Mary's. "About that, Bill, we need to talk." An hour later, as the wounded were tended and the dead were prepared for burial, Thomas drew Mary aside. They walked to a small rise overlooking the camp, the morning sun painting the grasslands gold. "It's over," Mary said, still hardly believing it. "The fight is," Thomas agreed. "But Mary, for us, I hope this is just the beginning." She turned to face him, seeing her future in his eyes. "Thomas, be sure. Your world, your life, I'll change everything. People will talk, some friend will turn away. Is saving a wagon train worth losing your place in society?" "I'm not saving a wagon train," he said softly. "I'm saving myself. Mary, these past days have shown me what I was missing. You've shown me. I have money, land, power. But what good is any of it without someone to share it with? Someone who sees me, not my bank account. Someone who'd stand with me against outlaws and high society with equal courage." "I'm still just a hired cook," Mary reminded him, though her heart was racing. "You're a woman who saved my life, who stood up to killers, who brought down an outlaw in the dark. You're educated, brave, kind, and beautiful. The only question is whether you can forgive me for being a rich fool who almost let pride keep him from the best thing that ever happened to him." Mary felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "Thomas Hartley, are you proposing to me on a battlefield?" "I'm proposing to you wherever you'll have me," he said, dropping to one knee right there in the dirt and grass. "Mary Sullivan, will you marry me? Will you help me build something better than just a cattle empire? Will you teach our children that courage matters more than class, that love bridges any divide? Our children—" Mary laughed through her tears. "Many children," Thomas confirmed, "who'll learn to shoot from their mother and negotiate from their father, who'll grow up knowing that anything is possible if you're brave enough to reach for it." "Yes," Mary whispered, then louder, "Yes, Thomas. Yes to all of it." He stood and kissed her as the camp below burst into cheers. Apparently, they'd had an audience. Mary didn't care. Let them see. Let everyone see that Mary Sullivan, orphan and hired help, had won the heart of Thomas Hartley. "There's just one thing," Thomas said when they finally broke apart. "You'll have to teach me that shooting trick. 300 yards in the dark. My ranch hands will never believe it." "Family secret," Mary teased. "I'll teach our daughters. And our sons. They'll learn to cook. Fair's fair." Thomas laughed, the sound rich and full of joy. I love you, Mary Sullivan. And I love you, Thomas Hartley. Rich fool and all. 3 months later, the wedding took place at the Hartley Ranch. The entire wagon train attended, having decided to settle on the land Thomas granted them. Legally this time, Widow Patterson served as matron of honor, while Bill Crenshaw stood as best man, having become Mary's fiercest protector and admirer. The reception was a mix of high society and frontier folk, cattlemen and farmers, rich and poor. Some of Thomas's business associates did stay away, but most came curious about the woman who'd tamed the territory's most eligible bachelor. They found Mary gracious but unintimidated, educated enough to discuss literature with the banker's wife, practical enough to swap recipes with the ranch wives. She moved between both worlds with the same courage she'd shown facing outlaws, building bridges with every conversation. No regrets. Thomas asked as they danced, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Only one, Mary said, smiling up at him. What's that? I never did teach you to shoot properly. What if more outlaws come calling? Then I'll just have to hide behind my wife, Thomas said, spinning her around. I hear she's quite formidable. Flatterer. Truth-teller. Mary Hartley, you are the most formidable woman I know. And I thank God every day that you pulled me from that river, even if I was trespassing at the time. Especially then, best illegal crossing in the history of the territory. As the stars came out over the Hartley Ranch, Mary looked around at their gathered guests, the wealthy and the poor, the established and the seeking, all celebrating together. It was a fairy tale ending. There would be challenges ahead, society to navigate, a ranch to help run, children to raise. But it was real. It was theirs. And it was worth every risk they'd taken to get here. Dance with me again, Thomas requested, pulling her close. Dance with me forever. Forever, Mary agreed, and meant it. In the distance, the river that had brought them together sang its eternal song, witness to how love could indeed bridge any divide, how courage could overcome any obstacle, and how sometimes pulling a stranger from the water could save not just one life, but two. The frontier had many stories of unlikely love, but few as cherished as that of Thomas and Mary Hartley. Proof that in the American West, anything was possible for those brave enough to reach for it, whether across class lines or into rushing waters, toward a future written not by society's rules, but by the heart's true compass.